start, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about myself. Some of you I probably know, and others I may not have had the opportunity to meet with just yet. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Trisha Clement-Montgomery. I have worked at the University of Kentucky for about 16 years now. I'm a mom of twins, Jada and Ethan, who are 7 years old now. And as you can see in this picture, they're actually a little younger than that, that's displayed up on the screen. But in this picture, they were about 4 years old. I have a wonderful husband who I love dearly, and we have actually celebrated 11 years of marriage, which in itself is a huge milestone. Prior to my life here at the University of Kentucky, I was actually born and raised in Bronx, New York. For those of you who may be New Yorkers on the call or familiar with New York City, I actually grew up not too far from Yankee Stadium. And so what some people don't know is that when you see Yankee Stadium on television, it looks extremely beautiful, but it's not necessarily placed in one of the best neighborhoods. And so it's a neighborhood that may be considered impoverished or a poor area. And that's basically where I was born and raised at the time. My mother is Jamaican and my dad is Antiguan. And they had me and my sister and my brother at a very young age. And I don't think that they were at all prepared to have kids or be parents. And so as a result, a huge part of my life was spent with my grandmother. My grandmother is from Santiago, Cuba, and she moved to Jamaica during the Fidel Castro era. She had an eighth grade education, but truly understood and valued what an education could bring to the quality of your life. So as a result, she sent me to Catholic school. And from the Bronx, I used to take the train every day to Manhattan to attend St. Joseph's Catholic School on 86th Street, which was right across from Central Park. That in itself was a life-changing experience, to go from a neighborhood that was not considered the best neighborhood or a poor neighborhood, and watching the faces change as I took the train, and watching the landscape change to high-rise buildings with doormen was just truly life-changing, in that it helped me see the other aspects of life that could be attainable. So I loved my experience going to Catholic school in Manhattan. I actually, and I'm sort of dating myself now, but I actually went to school with Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone. For those of you who remember that movie, both me and Macaulay Culkin went to school together from kindergarten to 8th grade. But again, there was so much that I garnered from that particular experience. So now I share all of that with you just so you can, one, have some understanding of my background, but two, know that I know a little bit about breaking barriers and building bridges. My background actually caused me to be a first-generation student. I was also the first in my family to receive my doctorate. And to my knowledge, I believe I'm the first African-American female woman of color acting dean of students here at the University of Kentucky. So with all of those experiences, I know exactly what it's like to be the first in your family to pursue a degree, to be in spaces where you may feel like you don't belong, to be in spaces where you're the only person of color, or to be the individual who is working a full-time job, trying to be a great spouse while simultaneously working on your education and taking care of kids, which can be really hard at times. I can also say that through those experiences, I have been on the receiving end of subliminal messaging, which is the topic of our conversation today. And what I hope is that my experience of dealing with subliminal messages will be shared throughout this presentation and will help you identify what subliminal messages are and how you deal with those subliminal messages on an everyday basis. So I spend a lot of time talking about myself, but I wanted to sort of transition into those moments that I talked about in the beginning, where I want to hear from you. And I would love to hear about what you feel and what your thoughts in relation to this topic are. So just take a few minutes in the chat, if you don't mind, to share with me and answer one of the two questions. What do you hope that this presentation will address for you? And then if you aspire to break barriers, have you run into any roadblocks in doing so? So I'll just give you a few seconds to do that, and Sarah will collect some of those chat responses for us.
Here we go. I'm hoping to gain solutions on how to break barriers. Yes, barriers include lack of knowledge, lack of resources, and lack of time. I would like to have the language to explain subliminal messaging to others who are unaware and to know some tools to take action to eliminate barriers. Communication issues. A lot of great responses now. What signals might I be giving that are holding me back? Barrier is wanting a higher position, but worrying about my work-life balance.
It's a good one.
Doubting their capabilities or being scared to put themselves out in spaces that they don't feel that they belong.
Okay.
Tactical ways to shift the overall culture. We find in macro and micro levels. Thank you all so much for participating. We are getting a ton of responses.
Well, Sarah, if you don't mind, definitely continue to share those with me. I am hoping, based off of what you shared, that this presentation, I'm confident, will address many of those things. But it's also really good to hear that we're not in this alone, and that many of us are hoping and searching for some of this same thing. So thank you all for those responses. I really appreciate it. So to answer some of the questions that was placed in the chat, I wanted to begin with explaining the difference between subliminal messaging and the imposter syndrome. When I started to think about this particular presentation and what my topic would be about, what automatically, honestly came to mind was the imposter syndrome. Many of you may have already heard about the imposter syndrome. If you haven't, you more than likely will hear it at some point in your career. It's a very popular term that's being utilized right now, but it's something that is very real and very frequent and common amongst females in particular, or women in the workplace. And so the imposter syndrome is basically a cognitive belief that you yourself may not have the skill set, the talent needed to be successful. You may feel like or have a fear of being exposed as a fraud, or the thought that you don't belong or should not be there. So it's literally the thought that you are an imposter. You are taking up a space that you may feel like you don't deserve to be in or don't belong in. Now, subliminal messaging, for me, many of you may have heard this term more frequently used in both the advertising and the marketing industry. With subliminal messages, it's pretty much messages that are camouflaged or embedded into presentations or visual representations that can alter your behavior or your thoughts, and your subconscious thoughts in particular. And so I actually would argue that there are subliminal messages in the workplace that many of us sometimes receive and are not aware that we're receiving, or are not aware of the harm that they cause over time. For instance, I think that subliminal messaging in the workplace for women are experiences that you may have that send a message that is also camouflaged and can be either good or bad. So these situations, particularly the bad ones or the bad experiences, could be literally when you are leading a particular project, and in this project, for whatever reason, or maybe you're the senior leader in the room, for whatever reason, all questions are directed towards your male counterpart, even though you may be the individual who is taking the lead. What message in that moment does that send to you? It could also, for instance, be when you have literally said something that is thought-provoking or inspiring, or you make a connection to theories or a practice that needs to be put in place. However, for some reason, when you say it, it's not necessarily taken as seriously. But if your male counterpart says it, all of a sudden is golden, and it's exactly what you said resonates more when your male counterpart may say it. And in that moment, what exact message are you receiving in that experience? What message are you receiving when having to deal with that particular situation? It's very frustrating at times, but it sends this message that maybe your dream to be a leader, or to be seen as the lead, or to be seen for promotion is unrealistic. It may be that opportunity in particular where you're passed up for a promotion, only to find out that your male counterpart, who may have less experience than you do, is considered for that promotion and actually placed later in that position. All of those are experiences that send you messaging that you may not be good enough, that you may not be prepared. And eventually it starts to eat at your confidence and your self-belief. And so my thought is that these subliminal messages, these experiences that you are receiving over time, is actually what's leading to imposter syndrome. It is actually creating or embedding the thought that maybe you don't belong. Maybe you're not supposed to be there. Maybe you are out of your league. And we are receiving these messages on a consistent basis. But to some extent, I would argue, not necessarily addressing those things, not understanding the impact that it can have on your behavior, on your thoughts, on your aspirations. After dealing with it for so many times or for so long, you just tend to overlook it, but don't necessarily realize just how much of an impact it has on you and your aspirations moving forward. So I just want to, now that you've heard what subliminal messages are, or at least what I'm thinking subliminal messages are in the workplace, I would like to just take a moment to ask, have any of you, as you reflect on it, on that definition, have any of you experienced subliminal messaging at one point in your life or in your career?
We have one that says, thank you for bringing up subliminal messaging, particularly related to being a parent. I often feel like I need to downplay the fact that I have 2 children at home, so it is not considered a weakness or a pull on my time. It's even harder now, feeling like I have to hide my children, even when they are always in my space. We're getting a lot of absolutelys, yes, constantly. I have personally and professionally and had no idea. Yes, many times from men and women. I have definitely experienced subliminal messaging at work, e.g. having my suggestions ignored in emails or meetings while other male colleagues' suggestions were heard, and then later having someone putting forth my idea as their own without acknowledging me.
Yes, that is a common one.
A lot of kind of the same idea with having an idea and someone else using it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In the undergrad experience, they experience it in their undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was an educator and I failed as a teacher comparing myself to him.
Oh, goodness.
Again, with being a parent.
Yeah.
Some from women at work.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to thank all of you, because I know that this is probably a difficult thing to talk about, because that's exactly the piece that I want us to try to address today, is that harm that is done. And you don't even realize it until after the fact. But there's a lot of emotional scars that these experiences brings, but we just deal with them and we move on and we don't necessarily address them. But again, my argument is that these experiences at some point tell you, maybe I won't apply for you. I won't pursue my dream to break those barriers because of these experiences that you're having consistently that are reinforcing this idea that you don't belong there or you shouldn't strive for that. So that is literally what's at stake. And when we move into the next part of this presentation, what's at stake is that if we don't learn how to identify these things, if we're unable to identify them, and if we're not prepared to address them and address the harm that they cause over time, what we will end up seeing is that we'll have less and less females in leadership positions. We'll have less and less females who are making less than their male counterparts, because there's this fear that you don't deserve the same amount of money, or you don't deserve that next level position. And so it's important that we not only identify these messages and the harm that they do, but that we also address them and address the harm that's done. In a lot of the comments that you all shared, you started to touch on exactly what was my next piece of this presentation. But how are these subliminal messages shared throughout your life? They can be shared from family members. They can be shared by coworkers. They can be shared by your supervisors in peer evaluations or performance evaluations. They can be shared by strangers, by friends. Sometimes they're even shared by other women. And so it's important that you know where these messages could potentially come from. They could also come from television, a movie that you watched. It could be the reflection in leadership. You may not necessarily see anybody, a woman or a person of color, or who identifies as transgender. You may not see them in these leadership positions, and that itself sends you messages that you don't belong or shouldn't aspire to be there. And so you need to be able to identify not only who is sharing those messages, but the message itself that is impacting you when they are shared. So the motive behind it could be jealousy, but it honestly could be just perpetuating social norms. It could be an insecurity, or it could be a known or unknown bias as to why they are sharing these messages. I actually had somebody that I supervised not a while back who said to me, I just deal better with male supervisors than female supervisors. And in that moment, I had to ask, so what am I supposed to do with that information? And what does that tell me about myself as a female leader and a supervisor, right? They just personally did not want to be supervised by female leaders. They said they took direction well from male leaders. But that in itself sends a very strong message to me and my ability to be able to move forward in supervising that individual. And so the motive behind it could be for a number of reasons. But again, what really is important is addressing the harm that they cause when shared. So I just briefly wanted to share an example of the subliminal messaging. As many of you know, we have elected Madam Kamala Harris as our next VP, and we are so excited for her and really excited for her to take on that role. I don't know if many of you saw some of the news headlines, but at some point it was shared in the news that her ex-boyfriend actually suggested or recommended that she not take the VP role, and that she actually should pursue the Attorney General role. And I thought to myself when I saw this headline, why or how did that conversation go? When her boyfriend at some point, somebody that she thought may have cared for her, had her best interests at heart, what does that conversation look like to encourage this individual not to pursue being the first woman of color in a VP position, but that she should actually lessen her aspirations to being the Attorney General? Now, it's not to say that the Attorney General is a bad position, not at all. But if you have the opportunity to aspire for something higher and something monumental and amazing, why would you not pursue that? And why would he feel the need to encourage her to do something lesser than what she is capable of? And so what I hope is that the next few slides to this presentation will actually address how do you combat these things. And what I hope Kamala Harris actually did and in order to pursue her next level position. So some of these things I have done myself. I say basically, if you are going to combat subliminal messaging that you may receive throughout your career, you need to take these 3 steps in order to do that and be successful in addressing the harm. You need to, 1, know your worth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. You need to have a mentor and a sponsor, and you should always, always, always consider the source. So when we talk about knowing your worth, actually, I had a great conversation with my supervisor, who is amazing. But Kirsten had a good conversation with me in which she shared, Trisha, I really think you should write down all of your accomplishments. And reason being is because you'll forget them. I want to believe that both myself and then other women out there, you have to write down your accomplishments because 1, it actually begins to identify your worth, all that you know that you are capable of doing and actually have done. So that as you experience these subliminal messages, at some point you can say to yourself, well, you know what? That is not true. These things are not true about me. I have accomplished these things. I am capable of doing these things. Do your own self-evaluation. Take a deep dive. Be honest with yourself. List out your accomplishments as well as your weaknesses and some of your goals. What exactly is it that you want to achieve? So then when presented with things that conflict with what you know about yourself, you're able to say, that's not true. That's not true about me. That's not true about how I aspire. That's not true to what I am trying to achieve. Now, the reason why it's important, and many of these these factors that I'm sharing, these 3 steps that I'm sharing, it's extremely important to be honest with yourself, because at no point do you want your ego to get in the way of receiving some really good feedback. But it is important, as you receive these negative messages occasionally throughout your career, that you truly do understand your worth, so that you can combat that with any conflicting information that you're receiving. The other piece is that it's good for you to have a mentor or a sponsor. I am so appreciative of the many mentors that I have come in contact with here at the University of Kentucky. A number of women and men have chosen to be mentors for me, in which I am just so grateful. Adrienne McMahon, Jim Wims, Lydia Wims, Christine Harper, Kirsten Turner, all of these individuals have played such a huge role in my life, and helping me move forward. But another piece to that is, not only am I doing my own evaluation, but these are individuals in my life who I trust and who are sharing information with me about myself, and can also provide me with some good feedback and criticism. So often when I'm receiving some of these subliminal messages, I often go to my mentors and say, tell me what you think about this. Give me a different perspective about what you may be seeing in this experience. But again, it's somebody that I know I can trust, and I know that I can share some really deep things, and who will be honest with me in the event that maybe I am wrong in the situation. But they are also really good at saying, no, it's not you, it's them. So it's really, really important that you, if you can, to find a mentor, find a sponsor, find somebody who's willing to play that role for you, so that you can sort of bounce off them your thoughts about these subliminal messages that you may be receiving. And then last but not least, always consider the source. So it's important, they're saying something to me that may not be true or may be harmful to my progression. Always think about the source. And if you have any questions about, I don't know if they're sharing the right information, consider the source. What's the motive behind what they may be sharing and the feedback they may be giving? Again, you don't want your ego to go in you don't want your ego to be in the way. If there is an opportunity for you to receive some really good critical feedback, you want that. But you also have to make sure that this is somebody you trust and will have your best intentions at heart. So now, just to kind of give you an example of how I've used some of these tactics, knowing my worth, as well as my mentor, and considering the source, I wanted to share an opportunity where I put all of these things together to truly address a subliminal message that I was receiving in the workplace. And so I interviewed a number of different schools and a number of different faculty at each one of these institutions. And when I was going through the interviews, I had met with one particular faculty member, and I shared that I, at the time, hadn't had kids yet, and you know, I had just recently been married. And the faculty member at the time said to me, well, if you want to pursue this degree, this doctoral degree, you will have to quit your job, and you need to reconsider whether or not you're going to have kids. You might need to push that back. And I said, well, I don't know if that's an option for me. I think I want to, I really do want to have a family. Is there any way that I can do both? And at one point, again, me being an African-American female, this particular faculty member, and it was at a different institution, wasn't at UK, but this particular faculty member said to me, well, there's another African-American female who's applying for this program, And who do you think they're going to pick? If she doesn't have kids and is not married, she can give her all and you cannot. And I walked away from that situation. And I remember at the end of the conversation, I said, well, thank you. If you just give me a moment to think about what you shared, I will get back to you. And so I left, and I knew my worth because I had already journaled. This was the goal that I wanted to achieve. And then I went to my mentor and I shared some of the feedback that I was given by this particular faculty member, and they were able to say, no, that doesn't sound right, Trisha. That doesn't sound right. I think you should explore other opportunities. And then I considered the source, and I don't know exactly what biases or what thoughts this individual may have had at the time, but I knew that they didn't know me well enough to know what I was capable of doing. And so I took that feedback with a grain of salt. I ended up responding to that and said, thank you so much. And I moved forward and actually applied to a different program. And 5 years later, I actually completed my doctoral degree. Had I had not known my worth, had I had not had those mentors in place, I would have taken that message and not pursued my doctoral degree, thinking that I wasn't capable of being able to do it. So I share all of this with you all to say, I want you to hopefully think back, reflect on your own experiences, the messages you may have received, and how you are going to move forward in addressing the harm that may have been done from the messages that you've received over time. I actually saw this quote as I was doing some of my research for this particular presentation. You can't knock a woman off her pedestal that she's built herself. So take the time to invest in yourself, to build that foundation. And then as these messages are coming in, it will definitely leave an opportunity for you to blaze a trail that can't be broken by anybody else's biases or concerns.